So, Jonathan Haidt, I am really delighted to meet you. I'm also a little bit intimidated because
Oh, come on.
I seriously am, because we are in very broadly similar fields, but yours is from a hugely sort of academic one, and you're professor of ethical leadership at the Stern School in New York. You've written 6 exceptional books, and this book feels like those other books were the precursors to make this book as successful as it is. Like, you've weaved your knowledge of decades into this book, and it has hit the zeitgeist. It's a bestseller in New York, #1. Here, it's a bestseller. I imagine in many territories, it's a bestseller. So you have found a way of naming what we almost couldn't quite name or face, and giving us a narrative for it in the book, and also a way of how we can adapt, how we can think about it, what we can
Mhm.
do about it. So you've given us action as well, which is often your kind of books tell us the problem, but they don't actually give us ways how to deal with the problem. So we're really going to get into that. But before we do that, a question I ask all my guests is there a particular challenge you have faced or are facing right now?
Well, I'll just say one dilemma that I have over the last few years is I turned 60 last October, and I'd had a few health issues over the previous years, and those things happening, and then like now my knee is bad. I lost my, I mean, aging stuff is happening, and so I was thinking, and I even made the mistake of telling my wife that I think I'm going to slow down after this book comes out. I really want to live a more balanced life. I haven't cared much about work-life balance because I love my work, and it's a calling, and I'm very mission driven. So I never feel like I need a rest. I never feel like I need time away.
It
But
feels like there's a force in you that almost wants to kind of stand up and just get it out there. Your mission is
yeah,
so big for you.
mhm. That's no, that's exactly right. So on the one hand, over the last couple of years, at times I've thought I'd like to slow down and not always be so busy and travel more and as a tourist, not always for work. On the other hand, then this book comes out. My book came out March 26th in the US and the UK. And the timing was just exactly right. Everyone was ready. Parents were sick of it. The revolt began in Britain actually in February, just before my book
Yeah,
came out. Parents began standing up, and it's spreading like wildfire. And so the
incredible.
point is not to brag about how well the book is doing. It's to say, on the other hand, I look at where I am and I say, I have maybe, who knows, 10 more good years left as a professor. I can go into my 70s, but who knows what I'll be like by the time I'm in my late 70s. This is the thing that I'm doing with my life. If I have an impact on the world, it's not from all my prior work on democracy and universities, which I think has had some impact. I'm very
Morals.
proud of it.
Yeah, yeah.
But this is just because of the nature of virality, because of the nature of this global problem, what's happening with this book swamps everything I've done in my entire life up till now. And so it's sort of like,
Yeah.
wait, are you serious? You would consider stepping back and not really jumping into the fray and leading the charge? And so I don't know. I'm wrestling with that. I don't know what to do. And I'm just going to keep doing what I can for now. And I'm hopeful that over the summer, things will slow down a bit and I'll get more clarity.
Yes, I mean, often raising the question doesn't necessarily, unlike your books, doesn't give you the answer personally, does it? It just raises a sort of tension of, this is the book of my life. This is the book
Mm-hmm,
that has all the other books led to.
mm-hmm,
Could I actually de-accelerate and put that down? So I prioritize my health, my longevity, my family, my own 2 sons, which is what I'm telling other people to do. I mean, that's the same with me, is that
mm-hmm.
there's a real thing where I give to other people what I don't give to my own family. And you're an
Yeah,
ethical professor.
yeah,
The imbalance of that is
yeah.
quite interesting.
Oh, I know. You put it perfectly. That's right. That's very much what I'm feeling. Yeah,
How do I take my own medicine?
yeah. I mean, I've been involved in a lot of social change efforts. From the time I was at university, I ran a gun control group trying to get legislation to do gun control, which was completely hopeless in my country, and especially in the state of Connecticut, where I went to college, which is a major location of gun manufacturing since the 18th century. So, all kinds of democracy reform efforts, all kinds of persuasion efforts. It's very hard. It's very hard to make progress persuading people. And on this one, I don't have to persuade people.
It's an
Everyone
open
was ready
door.
to act.
Yeah.
And so it is sort of like, well, do I want to maximize my impact on Earth? Do I want to maximize my personal happiness, my family. I don't know. So I have a therapist. I have been talking to him about this. So yeah, maybe we'll make some progress.
And just one more question before we get into this incredible book is the roots of where this kind of passion came from of wanting to create social change. Did your parents role model it? How, if you look back and you kind of think, what are the roots of this in me? Because they started when I was at university. Where is that from?
Yeah, that's a good question. The common thread is that I get very frustrated by stupidity. Like when I see a system that should be working and there's just some obvious thing that we just need to change. And when we had a huge crime wave in this country from the late 60s, early 70s through the mid 90s. It kind of disappeared. I mean, we still have crime, of course, but it's nothing like when I was growing up.
I remember
So
New
when I was in
York and
college,
everything.
yeah, no, that's right. New York in the 70s was terrible. And I went to Yale, so I was in New Haven, Connecticut, which is another decaying
Mm.
old industrial city in the United States, and it was very dangerous. And there were gang shootings, and it just seemed to me like, wait, this is insane. You mean anyone can buy a gun at any time? This is crazy. Like, this has to change. This is a terrible idea. So I spent most of my career at the University of Virginia in the psychology department as a sort of a standard professor running a lab, doing research on moral psychology. And almost on a whim, I moved to New York City. That is, when my book The Righteous Mind was coming out, I knew I wanted to be in New York City to promote it because we just had our second child in 2009, and by 2011 it was clear I'm not going to be able to just like go all around the country and leave my wife with the two kids. So let's move to New York for a year. And I found a temporary position at the business school here at New York University, at the Stern School. And once I got here, and then they liked me, I liked them, decided to stay, huge change in my life. But a business school is much more applied. You don't have to be doing original lab research and publishing it necessarily. And so the first project I took up when I got here was business ethics, because it seemed to me that there's all this research on organizational behavior and on ethics and behavioral ethics done by researchers.
But
And there are all
nothing
these
that,
companies over here dealing with ethical problems, and the companies aren't reading the academic research,
and
and
vice
the
versa.
academic research isn't written for the companies. It's written
Yeah.
to get publications in journals so you can get tenure. So it seemed like, wait, this is crazy. So I founded an organization called ethicalsystems.org to promote business ethics. And then I founded Heterodox Academy because I was concerned there's no viewpoint diversity in the academy. Everyone's on the left, and this is really interfering with the quality of our work. So I guess the answer, it's not some like deep humanitarian thing. It's just like, wait, I want systems to work well. I want institutions to work well. And so I start organizations to help them do so. Now, it is driven by a bit of a panic. That is, I am extremely afraid because of my work on moral and political psychology, I am extremely afraid that the path we're on, especially in the United States, more so than in the UK, is heading towards political collapse.
Yeah.
The conditions under which our founding fathers created a government structure that requires certain virtues of the citizens, certain abilities of the citizens to compromise, to work together, to make rules together, that is all declining very, very rapidly. So I do have a bit of a panic that some terrible things are possible in the future of my country, and also in other countries as well. We're seeing changes like this around the
Yes,
world
yeah.
in many countries. So I am driven by a passion, and one of them is, even though I'm working so much on the democracy front, if the young generation, if Gen Z, if we've been depriving them of practice in citizenship, we've been depriving them of being self-governing. We say, no, you can't go out and play with your friends. It's too dangerous. You have to be supervised by an adult at all times until you're 10, 11, or 12 years old. We are creating a generation that may have a lot more difficulty with the basic functions of democracy. So it's a combination of things, personal and a kind of a real concern for the way the world and especially my country are going.
And did your parents model that? Like your mum was quite tough. Was she very intolerant of stupidity and sort of like, well, do
I
something
think,
about it? Or your
yeah, let's
dad?
see. My mother was an extremely skillful mother. She was born in 1931, and she, like women of her generation, she got a master's degree in teaching, and she was a first grade teacher when she met my father. And then once they got married, she quit and
Stopped.
they started to raise a family. So she was raised very traditionally.
But she was
Um,
clever.
she sure was. She was very clever, very cultured. And with my older sister, she felt incompetent. She felt she didn't know what she was doing. So she took parenting classes from
Wow,
a man
that's
named
very early
Chaim Gnott.
adopter. Yeah.
It was, that's right. We're talking 1962. She took
Bloody
classes in
hell.
New York City from Chaim Gnott. He had a series of books between parent and child, between parent and teenager. But something about him and my mother's abilities, she was just so good at laying out, here's the way things work. Now, if here are the consequences if you don't do what you're supposed to do. And she held the line. She never made an idle threat. I'll never forget one time I was playing with my best friend Krister, who lived about a half mile away. And she called Krister's mother and said, John has to come home right away. Oh, okay. What is it? So I come rushing home. And she points and she says, you left the ice cream out. I'd taken ice cream out of the freezer and I left the container on
So
the
right.
counter. So she called me home to put it away. Very calmly. She didn't lose her temper, but she really just trained us like this is the way to
This
be.
has consequences.
Yeah.
Because actually, funnily enough, I obviously didn't know that about your mum, but to get into your book, one of the things I wondered about from a sort of social psychology dynamic was it that I don't want to call out mothers, but because mothers, 50% of the working population is now mothers, which it certainly wasn't. Is there an element of them being overprotective and helicoptering from a sense of guilt? Like, I'm not at home as much as I was. I'm not kind of there all day. So I kind of have to make up for it by really making my presence felt when I am there.
Yeah. I think there is some of that. There's a whole set of changes that happen at the same time in the 80s and 90s. It's very hard to tell what drove what. But I can tell you, based on the research I did on why we began to grossly overprotect our kids in the 90s. And the same thing happened in Britain and America at the same time, even though I don't think you had nearly as much crime and danger as we did in the 70s and 80s. But there's a great book by British sociologist Frank Furedi called Paranoid Parenting.
Mm.
He talks about how we lost trust in each other, we lost faith in each other. In any case, one of the surprising findings from the American data is that women in the 1950s and 60s who were not working, who had large families, 3 or 4 children, they spent, I forget how many hours a week it was, but some number of hours per week, let's call it X. They spent some number of hours per week in the 50s and 60s. Well, in the 1990s, now you have mothers, most of whom are working, they have fewer children, and they're spending a lot more time with their kids. In fact, we have the word parenting. We didn't have that in the 50s and 60s. We
No,
didn't talk about parenting.
exactly. No, it wasn't used.
So there's a great book. I quote from it in the book, the Gardener and the Carpenter, Alison Gopnik. And she talks about the rise of the idea of professional parenting. Because before then, women from my mother's generation, like they were raised around babies and women taking care of babies, and there was lore passed down, and it was done within the family. You learn how to care for children within the family. But by the time we get to the 80s and 90s, now families are small, they're separated. You're not living near your cousins and your
Yeah.
parents and your grandparents. So women are more on their own. And now that also women are much more educated, so especially among the professional class, this is less true among working class. Among the professional class, I read this book to prepare for my exams in college. Well, let me read this book to prepare for parenting my
Yeah.
child. And so you get more this pressure to do it perfectly, to do it right, to know the right things to do. And again, this is definitely class differentiated. We're talking the educated class. Working class is still doing what's called natural growth parenting. That is, kids will be kids, try to keep them getting killed in traffic, but other than that, let them do their
Feed
thing while I do
them,
my
get them
thing.
to bed. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I do think that there is some element of guilt and competition. A lot more pressure is put on mothers than fathers. If a father lets a kid out, lets the kid take some risks, we say, "Oh man, they're not careful or they're toughening the kid." But when a mother lets the kid take risks, then other people will say she's a bad mother. She's
Yeah.
putting her child at risk.
There's something so sort of ironic in wanting to be a better parent, in wanting to kind of learn about the developmental milestones and the psychological brain development of a child, that it meant that we've overparented. And in doing
Yeah.
that, we've not let them go out, not let them have their fights. So, do you want to talk about the sort of play based childhood
Sure.
reduced and the
Yeah.
iPhone based increased?
No, thank you. No, I'd be very happy to because people usually focus on the phone side. Everyone wants to talk to me about banning phones and social media. But I think what makes my book unique is that while I set out to write a book originally on democracy and I was going to just have one
Yeah.
chapter on the mental health stats, once I had that chapter on mental health stats, I said, wait, I have to explain what childhood is because I have to explain why it is that going on a phone all the time and not being out playing, why is that so bad? And so I had
And
to write a
why
whole
now?
chapter.
You had to, I mean, if you
Yeah,
any
what?
client that walks through the door, why have you come to me now? Why
That's
now?
right. In 2012 and later. That's right. Why was there an explosion in 2012, 2013? It wasn't like this in 2009, 2010. So, an important part of the backstory of the book is that I'd been working with a wonderful woman named Lenore Skenazy, an American journalist, lives in New York City, who wrote a book called Free Range Kids. And it's about the importance of letting your kids out, letting them have independent experience. She let her 9-year-old son ride the New York subway, New York City subway around 2008, 2009. And a lot of people freaked out. How can you do that? You're the America's worst mom, they said. My parents were riding the subway in New York City in the 1940s when they were 8, 9, 10 years old. In any case, she and I co-founded an organization called Let Grow. So if listeners go to letgrow.org, we have all kinds of advice. We're spending so much money on therapists for kids, but it turns out if you just give them graded independence, let them do a task. We call it the Let Grow Project. Let them pick something that they have not done on their own before. Maybe it's walk the dog. Maybe they've never walked 4 blocks to a store to pick up a quart of milk. Let them choose something to do. Let them do it. And they quickly gain confidence. They get less anxious. So it's such powerful stuff.
Because you get self-esteem and confidence from doing. You don't get it from just being in the swimming in a happy sea, do you? You get it
That's right.
from being set a task and succeeding.
Exactly. A really bad thing to do for your child is to build up their self esteem directly. You do not want to just get your child to think well of him or herself.
Extreme.
Self esteem has to come indirectly.
Yeah.
So if your child develops competences, then they feel good about themselves.
Yeah.
If they work hard, both of my kids run on the track team at Brooklyn Tech High School here in New York City. And they've trained very, very hard. And my son just set his personal record, his personal best in the
Wow.
mile and in the 800-meter run. And he worked really hard for that. And so he has a right to feel good about himself
Yeah.
now. Anyway, back to your question, though. So my book is not just about how smartphones are destroying our kids. It's about how there was a great rewiring of childhood. Childhood in our countries, in all the developed world, changed radically between 2010 and 2015. And it's the loss of the play based childhood, which humans have had for millions of years, replaced in a blink of an eye by a phone based childhood between 2010 and 2015. That's really what the book is about. So it's not just social media, it's about childhood. What's a healthy childhood? So let's dig into that a bit.
Yeah.
So, in my last book, The Coddling of the American Mind, I had a chapter on play, and I read a lot of the literature on play. Play is such an amazing thing. It's
Yeah.
not just entertainment. Baby rats play, baby monkeys play, baby squirrels play. Every animal, if you're a mammal, you play and you practice the skills you'll need as an adult, but you practice it in a really low stakes environment. So,
And also,
most
you
animals,
kind of learn how to want to kill someone and not actually kill them. You know,
exactly, that's right. You learn how to
which is an
cooperate.
instinct.
Yes. No, you learn how to cooperate and compete.
Yeah.
Imagine a child who only knew how to cooperate but not compete, or only knew how to compete but not cooperate. No, you have to do both at the same time. And animals play chasing games like tag, and that is predator. It's both when you're being chased, you're learning the skills of avoiding a predator without, and if you lose, you just get touched. You don't get eaten. So it's low stakes, low risk. Kids need millions of cases of that in order to wire up their brains. And what we did in America was we said, beginning in the 80s and 90s, we said, let's reduce that by 50%, 80%, because outdoor play, unsupervised outdoor play is the best, the healthiest. That's what kids really crave. We
How
said,
do
no
we
more of
know
that.
it was reduced? I couldn't see that in your book, how we know it was reduced.
Oh, there's many ways. One is I do quote, there's one longitudinal survey. They asked a set of questions in 1979 and again in 1997 about time use. And they asked it of either of kids or they asked it of parents to fill out for the kids. I can't remember which. In any case, I can say with confidence that research that asks British and American adults to quantify what were you doing at this time, at this time, at this time, keep track, shows that what's gone up is time on screens and time in supervised activities for kids. What's gone down is time outside and I forget what else, but basically unstructured play just in general. Those
Unstructured.
have gone down.
Mm.
That's one. Another way we know is I do this very simple demonstration. I've done it in Britain a number of times and in America, where you just ask the adults in the room, at what age were you let out? At what age could you go outside and play with your friends? And the answer is 6 to 8. That's what it always was in your
I
country and in mine.
walked myself to school at 6.
Yeah, that was normal because all around the world, 6-year-olds can do that. A 4-year-old can't be entrusted to care for a calf or a goat, but all around the world, 6-year-olds are entrusted to bring a cow down to the stream for watering or whatever. 6-year-olds they're beginning to get competent. Now, it's best if they're not alone. I would not recommend Americans send their 6-year-old walking to school alone. But if it's a group of kids, with older kids, and then you have a 6-year-old, I'd say, yeah, go for it. I mean,
Yeah.
if the walk is
It's more
relatively
fun
safe and
too.
you,
Yeah.
it's so exciting. That's the
Yeah.
thing. Kids are so excited. They have adventures. Whereas a lot of kids in my children's generation, they have had no adventures. They've always been supervised by adults.
But that keys in your discover mode as opposed to your defend mode, which is
Exactly.
how the mind operates, is that you're looking with positivity to discover and explore and adventure, as opposed to, oh my God, the outside world is
Yeah.
terrifying and dangerous, where you defend.
That's right. Yeah, let me just define that because that seems to be a concept that is sticky, that a lot of people like. And I think
I do.
especially in a mental health audience, so people are actually doing therapy. I think this will be a very useful concept. So the technical term is that there are two systems in the brain. They're not literally like geographically separated, but there are two functional systems in the brain. One is called BIS, the behavioral inhibition system. It's localized more in the front right cortex. It's about fear. It's like inhibit behavior, freeze, stop,
Stop.
danger, threat, get the adrenaline, emergency, because life is full of predators. I went on a visit, like a safari type visit to Botswana with my family a few years ago. And you see the way life is in the wild. I mean, you can get eaten at any moment. I mean, this is the way our ancestors lived for millions of years.
Freaking dangerous.
It's, yeah, you never can
Yeah.
relax. That's BIS, the behavioral inhibition system, very deep, very powerful. And then there's also BAS, the behavioral activation system, which is like when you see opportunity, like, oh, wow, look, here's a beach with, oh, we can look for oysters, and, or here's a tree with fruit in it. Let's
You
climb the
can
tree.
climb.
So the behavioral activation system, which is exciting, it's like you're a kid in a candy shop, like, let's go, let's do something. If you're with a group of friends and it's a sunny day and you don't feel any immediate threat, then you're much more in discover
Yeah.
mode.
Nice.
So when we think about students arriving at a university, this is what we saw in 2014, 2015. The students who arrived at American universities in 2014, 2015 were really different from those who arrived in 2012 and before. Before, they were millennials. They were born between 1981 and 1995. And they were what you would think of college students. They want to have fun. They want to learn. They want to have sex. They want to drink. They're in
Play.
discover mode mostly. They want to play. But the students coming in 2014, 15, 16, and since then, I mean, some of them are like that, but they're much more shifted over towards BIS, towards behavioral inhibition system. They're more anxious. They see threats everywhere. They think if someone tells a joke, it's going to harm them. It's going to harm someone. We have to stop people from telling jokes. So they're just set to anxiety. They're set to more anxious. And so rather than BIS BAS, which is hard to remember, the labels I think are much better are discover mode is BAS, the behavioral activation system, and defend mode is BIS. And so, of course, when you're in college, there might be moments when you should be in defend mode. You might actually be in physical danger at some point in your 4 years. I mean, American universities are incredibly safe places physically. So it's not that you should never be in defend mode, but you shouldn't be in defend mode every day. And you shouldn't be in defend mode for more than a minute every day. Like, you should be in discover
It
mode.
should be the exception.
Yeah, yeah. It should be your default state should be discover mode. And so what a lot of my book is about is why is it that kids born after 1995, their default state is defend mode, whereas kids born before 1995, their default state is discover mode. I mean, this is a global tragedy. If the next generation of humanity, this is not, I don't know about the developed world. Let's make that clear. What I'm talking about is definitely happening in all of the most advanced free
Canada,
societies. So
Europe.
the Anglo societies and the Nordic societies, for sure, we've got good data on those. Southern Europe, maybe a little less so. Eastern Europe, maybe a little less so. Developing world, I just don't know. But across the developed world, in the West, again, East Asia is a little different. There a lot of things are different in East Asia. But across the developed West, we're seeing this change. And it all starts with kids born after 1995. It all really hits in the early 2010s when we get the great rewiring of childhood, when the play-based childhood is over, and by 2015 is replaced by the phone-based childhood.
And so, if I had an image for what you're describing, is that because our brains kind of develop to five and then five to teenager and then another huge bit in puberty, it's not having a play-based childhood meant that our brains, or the children's brains of that period, were more fragile, and so leaning more towards predisposed to look for danger.
That's right.
And
I would say
no,
threat sensitive. I mean,
okay,
yes,
that's a better
ultimately
way
they
of
become
saying
more
it.
fragile, but I think the right word here is they're more threat sensitive. They're tuned to see threats more, which is sad.
And you want them to be anti-fragile. I love that term.
That's
You
right.
want them to be
Yes, that's right.
robust and resilient.
Yes.
And the anxiety went up 134%.
Yeah, depending on how you measure it. We're talking between 50% and 200%. We're not talking a 20% increase in anything. Like everything is a huge increase.
Particularly for girls.
Yes, it's bigger for girls, usually not always percentage wise, but it's always sharper for girls. This is an interesting clue in the data. The increases for girls are very sharp at around 2013, whereas for boys, it's more gradual. So something happened around 2012, 2013 that really affected girls. It didn't have as clear an impact on boys. And I believe what that was Instagram. Instagram was
Images.
founded, it was founded in 2010 for photographers. At the time, there were no front-facing cameras. It was for photographers. But also later in 2010, the front-facing cameras put on the iPhone 4, I think it was, and then also on the Samsung. And in 2012, Facebook buys Instagram. Didn't change it, but that was the year it became hugely popular. They bought it for billions of dollars. It was a big news story. 2012 is the year that a lot of girls move their social lives onto Instagram. They start taking selfies with their new front-facing cameras. They've now got high-speed internet, which they didn't have in 2009. So by 2015, it's possible, especially for girls, to be spending 3-4 hours a day on Instagram, managing their brand, posting photographs, looking at thousands of photographs of other girls each day. So this
Scrolling.
really did a number to girls' development. And another really important clue in the data, is that millennials are fine. Millennials, those born before 1996, they didn't get all this stuff until they were in university. They didn't get it until they were done with puberty.
So they
So
went, yeah.
now a lot of them will say it messes them up. They'll say it makes them anxious, but it doesn't seem to cause them to be clinically depressed. Whereas for Gen Z, they literally went through puberty in the virtual world. They literally went through puberty on stage. I think, actually, please tell me, some British interviewer told me there's a phrase, "Don't put your daughter on the stage, Mrs. Worthington." Is that
Yes.
something you've heard?
Yes, of course I have. Yeah.
Okay. So I looked it up. I think it's an old Noel Coward song.
It is Noel Coward, yeah.
Okay. That line is so important. Don't put your daughter on the stage, because especially for girls, if you grow up as a girl, always on camera, and not just on camera, but on camera with people talking about every photo taken, and you can see what they're saying about
Giving
every
you
photo
feedback.
taken.
Ugh.
That's right. My wife pointed this out to me a number of years ago. There's an Instagram pose. All the girls are doing it. It's very sexy. It's like boobs forward. Yeah. It's curvy. And
It's the opposite of authentic, isn't it? It's so
exactly.
performative.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's performative and it's porn based. I mean, it's
Yeah.
the girl porn culture, because all kids are exposed to pornography. So
Yeah.
the girls' culture, even if they haven't seen porn, well, they all have seen it. So anyway, my point is, girls are particularly affected by being on stage and being having their bodies and faces commented on every day, hundreds of times a day. It's just terrible.
So should we break it down to the 5 harms and the 4 norms to break it?
Okay, sure. Let's give people checklists.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
You've done it a lot.
No, people don't usually ask about the 5 harms, the foundational harms. I'm engaged in debate with some other researchers as to whether the evidence is strong that social media causes mental illness. Or correlates, that's right. And maybe we'll get back to that later. But the short story is there's a lot of correlational evidence. There's actually a lot of experimental evidence as well. One thing, meaning controlled experiments, random assignment, have people get off social media. So we're all arguing about that. That's fine. But what I tried to do in the book is say, it's not just about mental illness. This is a pervasive change in childhood that is blocking development in almost every way. So I ended up having a whole chapter just on these 5 foundational harms that are affecting everyone, boys and girls. Then there's a whole chapter on like 5 different ways that social media harms girls. There's a whole chapter on boys. But the foundational harms are as follows. The most basic one is the opportunity cost. Yeah. That is, right now, the latest data from the US is 5 hours a day. On average, teens are spending 5 hours a day just on social media. Now that includes TikTok and YouTube, so it's a lot of video watching. It's not all posting and commenting, but TikTok videos are horrible things overall. So 5 hours a day on social media, and then it's another 4 hours a day on other applications. So 9 hours a day on your phone. Where's that going to come from? And so even if that 9 hours was healthy, even if that 9 hours was all educational video, it's still 9 hours a day. And these kids are in school and they have after school activities. And so what does that mean? That means that everything else declines. A kid with a flip phone in 2009 couldn't spend 9 hours a day on his flip phone. But a kid with a smartphone in 2015 is spending 9 hours a day on his phone. What that means is there's less sleep, less time outside, most importantly, less time with friends.
Yeah.
Less social, that's right. They read, suddenly there's a big decline. The reading of books has been declining in America for a while, but it gets much sharper after 2010 because there's no time. And it's not just the kids. There are these amazing findings of what's happening to adults in the US here too that I'll just put out. One is there was a slow decline in religion and church attendance before 2012, before 2010, but it's much faster after that, because adults are too busy. Everyone is so busy. I mean, if you've got 9 hours a day of stuff, we're all processing too much stuff. You think, should
Too
I go to
much
church?
data.
No, I'm too busy.
I
I'm
mean,
too busy.
and also the weathering of the mind. It
That's
just
right.
does
That's right.
your head in.
Exactly. And so that's even more important for the next one, which is, so it's been known for a while that Americans are having less sex. Now, is that, and especially
Such
the
a
millennials, younger
shame.
people,
Oh my
well,
God.
for so many reasons, yes. So the millennials, it's been known, are having less sex. But it's also been known that, well, part of the reason is that married people have more sex. So if you're single, you're not having sex regularly usually. So married people have more sex, especially when they're on the younger side. But what's happening now? Let's just look at married people. If you just look at married couples in the United States, they're having less sex than they did. It's since 2012, that's been dropping too. And again, we're just all frazzled and busy and overwhelmed. There's no
And
time
the
for anything
last
else.
thing they kiss at night is their phone. The first thing they
Yeah,
kiss in the
that's,
morning
oh,
is their phone.
what a good way to put it. I'm going to use that phrase. Thank you. Yes. Oh no, my students at NYU, I work with them on improving their morning routine, their evening routine. And because what I discovered in working with them is for almost all, the very last thing they do before they close their eyes is check their direct messages
A
and their texts.
notification. Oh my
It's
God.
not brush your teeth and go to bed. The last thing is that, and when they wake up in the morning, what's the first thing? Do they go to the bathroom? Do they drink a glass of water? Do they shower? Do they have coffee? No, the
Go for a
very first
walk.
thing is
No.
you pull out your phone and you do the same thing. So to answer, you asked me before about the 5 foundational harms. So the opportunity cost, and one of the things that it pushes out is social interaction.
The single biggest
Yes.
predictor of happiness for your life that makes you wealthier, healthier, feel less pain, happier
Yeah,
is relationships. Is the
that's right.
quality of your relationships.
Exactly. And social media hooked the girls by saying you can connect with your friends, you can make new friends, you can find out what your friends are saying about each other, what they're saying about you. So it lures them in. But the nature of a trap is you put something delicious in the center of the trap, and then the trap
Yeah.
closes, you're stuck. So the girls get lured in, and what happens? Now they're stuck spending 5 hours a day on social media. Now they don't have time to actually see their friends. So social media gives them more social interaction of a much lower quality, and it blocks out what they most need, which is a small tribe, a couple of close friends. For boys, it's not as addictive. Social media is not as addictive to the boys, but the video games are. About 5 to 10% of boys do get addicted, and then they have much more serious damage to other developmental pathways, to their daily lives. So I don't think it's a good idea for 10, 11, 12-year-old boys to be playing these incredibly exciting video games for hours each day. 2 hours a day on the weekends, I think, would be fine for the most part. But 3 hours a day, 7 days a week, no, you
Yeah.
should not have your kid doing that until at least they're done with puberty. Anyway, all right. So we have opportunity cost, we have social deprivation, we have sleep deprivation, which has pervasive effects,
Mm.
including more anxiety and depression, worse relationships, you're more irritable.
Mm.
We have attention fragmentation, which is that it's hard to pay attention to anything. We're all feeling it. I don't use my phone very much because I'm always at a computer, but there's so many things on my computer, and there's always a distraction waiting for me on my computer.
Mm.
So imagine going through puberty, never having attention to anything for 20 minutes. You're always being interrupted. You're always getting notifications. So a lot of young people have difficulty paying attention. One thing that we often see is we'll see young people like in the workplace, they're on their computer, but they have their phone right next to the computer and they're doing both. Sometimes they can't watch a video. They have to watch 2 videos at the same time, one underneath the other.
Oh my
They need
God.
extra stimulation to
Jeez.
pay attention.
Well, because the
So
homeostasis, once we've hit one limit, it sets us up
exactly.
to have another limit.
That's right. Well, it's that once your dopamine system has been flooded with quick dopamine hits, it changes its
It's
receptivity,
receptive.
so that now it takes more to get to the
Yeah,
same
that's what
level,
yeah.
which means that if a boy is playing 4 hours of video games a day and then the parents take it away, the next day the boy's dopamine levels are way below what he needs to feel normal, and everything feels boring and irritating and anxiety producing. So, and then the fifth of the foundational harms is addiction. Even though most kids are
Which
not
you've
addicted
just
to,
described, actually, haven't you?
that's right.
That's what the
5 to 10
addiction is.
percent have what psychiatrists or psychologists call problematic use. Now, in effect, it looks like addiction. It looks like compulsive use that interferes with other activities. It interferes with love and work, as Freud would say. Anything that makes you less successful, less able to focus on love, relationships, or work productivity, doing something productive, is going to harm your development and your prospects and your happiness. And so 5 to 10% of our kids, of the boys, are getting addicted in that way to
It's a
video
lot
games,
of
5 or
boys.
10% of girls to social media. That is a huge risk.
It's
If you have
huge.
a 10-year-old child and you're considering giving her a smartphone and letting her get on Instagram and TikTok, if you knew that there was a 5 or 10% risk of addiction, we would never do that, but we do.
So let's look at what you want to change, which is the government, parents, and schools.
Yes. So the key to the whole thing
It's
is this idea
collective.
of a collective action trap. That's right. So, because my student, the really interesting thing, in fact, I was just talking with a German journalist, and she said a study was done, and when they, or it was maybe it was in a newspaper, but they when they interviewed the 10-year-olds, they were all like, "I want a phone, I want TikTok, I want." Then they interviewed 18-year-olds, and the 18-year-olds are all saying, "Oh man, this really messed me up. I wish I didn't. I wish this didn't exist." And that's what survey studies find that as well. When you talk to college students, when you survey college students, and you ask, do you use Instagram regularly? Yes or no. Do you use TikTok regularly? Yes or no. And then you say, would you prefer to live in a world where TikTok was never invented, where it just didn't exist? A large majority of college students say yes. 58% of regular users of TikTok say yes. So imagine that. Same, and for Instagram, about the same. Imagine that you have a product that is sucking up most of the attention of the human species, especially teenagers, all around the world. Well, in the developed countries,
Yeah, you said.
I think I calculated 70 billion hours a year just in the United States, something like that. It's sucking up most of their available brain capacity, of their thinking capacity, and they regret it. They regret it. Imagine investing most of our capital in something that's a mistake.
So that people wish it hadn't been invented, but
Yes.
when you actually ban things, it makes them more desirable, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, there's that effect. There's the forbidden fruit effect, but it's nowhere near as big as the social addiction effect. Think about it this way: cigarettes are addictive, they're biologically addictive. In the United States, I looked up the data. The peak year of smoking for high school students, late teenagers, the peak year was 1997 when 37% of American teens smoked. That means that two-thirds didn't. Two-thirds of our students didn't smoke in the peak year. You can choose not to smoke. You have that choice, even as a high school kid. You have that choice. Now let's look at social media. If we look at 13-year-olds, look at eighth grade, I don't know exactly what the number is, but it's certainly north of 80%. It's probably in the 90s. So almost everybody at a much younger age, at age 11, 12, 13, almost everybody is on social media because it's socially addictive. It's a trap. The reason people
We're
are on it
wired
is
to be
because everyone
social.
else is on it.
Yeah.
Well, we're wired, right? We're wired to be social. And
We're
what we're
wired to be
really, really,
socially embodied in the real world, but this is the trap
yeah,
that it's in the
that's
virtual
exactly,
world.
that's right. It's a simulacrum. It's a fake sociality.
Yeah.
But since you think that everyone else is on it, and they are, you have to be on it. Kids are terrified of being the only one, terrified of being left out.
So the sort of four basics I learned from your book is that you shouldn't be on social media till you're 16.
Okay, yeah, I think it's best to do it in this order.
Okay.
So the first rule: no smartphone before 14. Now in the U.S., I say high school because we have a very clean break. In the UK, your secondary school goes more from like 11 or so until 16. So actually, what the parent groups in the UK are saying is no smartphone until the end of secondary
So you
school,
can
which
have a
is even
flip
better.
phone so your parents
You
can
can have a
know where
flip
you
phone.
are if you
Yeah,
get lost
that's
or
right.
you're, yeah.
Right. You want it. You don't want your kid to be out of communication entirely. You want them to have a phone if something goes wrong. Give them a flip phone.
Mm.
When they're young, if they're 9, 10, 11, and if they're going out on their own, give them a phone watch. You don't need to give them the entire internet, including all the pornography,
Yeah,
all the
yeah.
murder videos. That doesn't need to be in their pocket with them all the time until much later. So no smartphone until, well, 14 in the US, but I think 16 in the UK is what they're going for. I think that's actually right.
Yeah.
The second rule is no social media until 16. You should not be able to open an account. You should not be able to sign a contract,
You should.
terms of service, give away your data, let this company take over your childhood without your parents even knowing or consenting.
And the
This is insanity.
verification thing.
Yeah, there's no age verification. So if you're old enough to lie about your age, you're old enough to be on social media and on pornography sites. So that's the second rule: no social media before 16. The third rule is phone free schools. There was just a great report put out by Policy Exchange, a UK think tank. They surveyed hundreds and hundreds of schools in the UK and found that only 13% of them had an effective phone ban. An effective phone ban is where the phones are locked away, they're not
And
accessible during the day. Most schools, as in the US, they say, oh, yeah, we ban phones. Our students are not allowed to take out their phone during class. They have to leave it in their pocket, which is like running a heroin treatment clinic and saying, come in for your therapy
bring your
session,
heroin in your pocket.
bring your
Yeah.
heroin, but don't shoot up. That's right. Put it in your pocket with your needles. Just don't shoot up. That's our rule. You can't shoot up. You have to go to the bathroom if you want to shoot up. So phone-free schools is urgent, and it's such a big bang for the buck, as we say. It's an incredibly effective policy. Every school that goes phone-free, everyone. I've been looking for stories. I can't find any counter stories. Every school, they say, "Wow, we hear laughter in the hallways. The students are talking to each other. They're paying attention in class. Our teachers are happier." So phone-free schools is a must. Every school
And
should
ways
go
to talk
phone-free.
to the schools about that is on your website, letgrow.org,
Yes,
isn't it?
that's right. If you go to anxiousgeneration.com, we have there's a take action page. We have all sorts of stuff, and we also link to many other organizations. So I'll just mention two. One is
Great.
smartphonefreechildhood.co.uk.
I'll add it
Another
to
is
the.
delaysmartphones.org. But just look up that phrase, delay smartphones. So you've got a couple of great organizations in the UK. So parents can band together and they can really be effective in convincing the school to change. That's the third rule. And then the fourth rule is really the hardest, and it's crucial. It is far more independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world. If we're going to say you can't grow up on a screen all day long, we're taking most of that away. You're not even going to get your own phone until you're much older. We have to give them something back. And what we should give them back is a childhood,
Yes.
play, time with each other. That's what
I
adventure.
love the last line in your book is bring children home.
Yes, bring them back to planet Earth. We evolved on
Yeah.
planet Earth. We can't be raising our kids on Mars. Is the metaphor
No.
that I use throughout
Yes.
the book.
Yeah. And that you want them to embodied fighting, playing, risking, having fun,
That's right.
succeeding, having adventures in the
Mhm.
real world.
That's right. Right. I would invite anyone listening, if you're over 35 especially, think back on your own childhood. Think back on the most exciting moments, your fondest memories. Think back on the things that were thrilling. And now imagine you're raising your own kids, and imagine you take away almost all of that. You say you don't get any of that. Instead, if you've got a son, your son's never going to wrestle or wrestle with his friends or do anything really exciting, a little risky. When your son is 70 years old, he's going to talk to his buddies and he's going to say, do you remember Fortnite Battle 23,476, where you were trapped behind the staircase and we shot our
Oh
way out?
gosh.
Remember that? Like, no, they're not. They'll have nothing. They'll have nothing. No adventures. So we have to give kids back a childhood worth remembering fondly.
And as you're saying that, can you define the difference between the real world and the virtual world? Because that's really what you're talking.
That's right. We are biological creatures. We are animals. Every animal has intense evolution for communication. Humans, much more than any other creature. We have all kinds of stuff we have to learn about eye contact. We're affected by pheromones, by chemicals from each other's bodies. Children love to touch. They love to hug. I remember putting my arm around my best friend. We would do arm wrestles.
Yeah.
We'd hug when we got reunited. Kids are physical. We're primates like chimpanzees.
Yeah.
We're physical creatures. If you take away all of that, so there are four features of the real world that are not shared by the virtual world. The real world is embodied. Our bodies are part of it. Our heads
Mind
movements.
body connected though.
That's right. Mind body connections. Our bodies are important in communication. So they're embodied,
Contagious.
they're synchronous. So right now on a Zoom call, we have some synchrony, like I can see, but it's not perfect. If we were in the same room, like our eye contact would be much more intense and important. Because right now, we're both looking at the picture of each other on the screen, right? I'm not looking at my camera. You're not
And
looking
I
at your
don't know
camera.
what you're doing with your feet. I
Yeah,
can't
that's right.
read
That's
all
right.
of you. Yeah.
That's right. Even my hands, like my hands are off camera now.
Yeah.
So the real world is embodied, synchronous. It's usually one to one or one to several. You're you talking to a couple of friends. So you're not performing, you're relating.
Yeah. You're not on the
Whereas even
stage, Mrs. Worthington.
exactly. And even on these group chats, a lot of our kids are on group chats with like 30, 40, 50 kids. That's not communicating, that's performing. If you say something bad, everyone's going to make fun of it. It's going to be very painful. And then the last one is that real world relationships or communities, they have a high bar for entry and exit. You can't just block someone and move on. You have to actually deal with the kid on the school bus or your neighbor or your cousin. You have to deal with them and you have to learn how to get along and how to resolve conflicts. Whereas
Conflict.
online, if you don't like somebody, you block them, you report them, you leave the platform, people come and go. So kids are not rooted in stable, long lasting communities. And it's like trying to raise a plant in the air. Plants need to be rooted in soil and take
Soil.
all the nutrients from the ground.
Yeah.
If we were to take all of our crops and just try to raise them in the air, they'd shrivel. And I think that's what's happening to our kids.
And also us adults, right? So what you're saying, I mean, I know developmentally it's much more damaging for kids, and you can look at the difference between millennials and Gen Z.
Right.
But also, I can feel it in myself that I'm more
Yes.
fragmented, that I'm not
Yeah.
role modeling my attention or being with, and so, I mean, in some ways, what you're saying for young people, actually, all of us, if we want young people to do it, we need to model it ourselves, don't we?
We should, but I actually think young people aren't very interested in what we're doing. If I start reading a newspaper every day, a paper newspaper, my 14-year-old daughter is not going to want to start reading a newspaper. We're not mindlessly copying what people are doing. And teenagers are not copying their parents, they're copying each other.
So this
So
is,
there are very good reasons for us to get a handle on our media use, but that's for our own happiness and productivity. I'm not so worried about it affecting our kids. The one exception to that is if you have an infant. If you have an infant really needs the attunement. They need the back and forth. They're like, I smile, you smile, then we both laugh. Like they have to get the timing right. And what's happening, because we're all so busy and so many women are working, like even with your infant or your toddler, you're doing what's called continuous partial attention. So you're on your phone, but your kid is playing and your kid brings you something. Oh, yes, yes, that's the kitty. Yes, yes. And you're sort of just doing that a little bit. So that's
and
really
also
bad.
what I call the sort of one-eyed babysitter, like you give the child the phone
Yeah, that's right.
instead of your
That's
face.
exactly. So that's how we got into this, was in the early 2010s when all these personal devices, the iPhone and then the iPad, when they came about, we all discovered that if you just look, the kid is screaming for the iPhone or the iPad anyway. That's what they most want because they've seen it. It's colorful, it flashes. It's what they most want. And we all discovered, hey, if I just give them a device, I can read in peace, I can
I could
cook,
get
I
on
can
my
do my
chores. Yeah.
yeah, I can do my chores. So that's why our kids are being raised this way. I was just in the UK 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and Ofcom put out a stat that 24% of British kids ages 5 to 7 have their own smartphone, their own smartphone.
No.
That's not even including tablets, their own smartphone. Because you have your phone from 3 or 4 years ago, right? You didn't throw it out, it's in a drawer. So you say, okay,
Yeah.
I'll charge
Take
it
it.
up, and here, Billy, at age
Yeah.
4, here, this can be your phone. You can watch cartoons on it, but they do a lot more than watch cartoons on it.
Right. So your when will you know that your mission is accomplished, and then you can
Um,
have a quieter life?
well, I actually think that we're going to have a global change much quicker than people think.
You think we're
Because
at a
wherever I
tipping
go,
point?
yeah, we're at a tipping point right now, and wherever I go, people had a sense of despair, like, oh, the genie's out of the bottle, toothpaste out of the tube. What can we
Yeah.
do? A real feeling of helplessness. But that's changing, like right now. Like, where are we? This is now May 20th. Like
Yeah.
in February, March, April, May. Right now, these last few months, there's a new sense of possibility. People are realizing, wait, I've been struggling with this on my own, and it's really hard. But if I just reach out to the parents of a few of my kids' friends. If we have 3 or 4 families that are all doing this together, all following those 4 rules, no smartphones till 14 or till 16, if we all agree on the rules, then our kid isn't the only one. Our
Yeah.
kid isn't left
And
out.
that's the
And
thing. It's hard to hold the line.
that's right. That's right. It's hard to hold the line when you're by yourself. But if you have 4 families doing it, and let's just say you 4 kids, like you all get together every Friday afternoon. Nobody has piano lessons. Friday afternoon, you guys just get together, no supervision. You can start at
And
any of our
play.
houses, go out, have fun. We'll give you an allowance. You can go to a movie, you can go buy popcorn, but go do things together, unsupervised. Now it's exciting. Now it's not just deprivation. Now it's
It's a
actually like,
treat.
it's a treat. That's right. That's right.
That's a lovely way to end, Jonathan. Thank you so much. That's a really wonderful conversation that I know everyone listening will take so much from. And congratulations on a seminal book. I mean, it is changing people's lives, which is, I guess, the aim.
Well, thank you, Julia. As from one parent to another and to a grandparent, we all want what's best for our kids, and we've all had a creeping sense that something's going wrong for our kids, but it doesn't have to be that way. Now that we know what's going on, if we just work together, if we do this together, we can win.
And actually, that could influence your worry about democracy too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia.